It took fuel injection to make the jet engine possible. And now fuel injection opens a new age of automotive performance.
Imagine paying $484 for an engine upgrade in 1957, roughly a full month's salary for the average American, only to have your mechanic refuse to touch it and tell you to rip the whole thing out. That is exactly what happened to hundreds of Chevrolet owners who checked the box for Rochester Ramjet fuel injection, the first mechanical fuel injection system ever fitted to an American production car. It made the Corvette the fastest production car in the world at the time. NASCAR banned cars running it before the '57 season was even over. The Beach Boys sang about fuel-injected Stingrays because of it. And yet actual owners were walking into dealerships asking, sometimes begging, to have it taken off and replaced with a set of carburetors. Same part. Two completely different reputations. One was a legend on the street, and the other was a nightmare in the shop. So how does the most advanced engine option in America end up collecting dust on a shelf in the back of a garage? To understand why this system even existed, you have to know what was going on inside Chevrolet in late 1956. Plymouth and Ford were both launching completely redesigned cars for '57, ground-up new bodies, new frames, new everything. Chevrolet was nervous. They needed something to prove the Corvette was more than a pretty face, and they needed it yesterday. Now, according to a road test from that era that Curbside Classic archived, the decision to bring fuel injection to market was made very late in 1956, practically on the introduction deadline. At that point, the system was still what the engineers called a breadboard layout, which is basically a collection of parts that work together on a test bench but are nowhere near ready for a production line. Chevrolet pushed it through anyway. See, Mercedes-Benz already had fuel injection on the 300 SL since 1954. That was direct injection, diesel style, extremely complex. Chevrolet did not try to copy that approach. What they built was a continuous flow port injection system. Fuel sprayed constantly into the intake ports, not timed to each cylinder's firing like modern sequential injection, and not shot directly into the combustion chamber like the Mercedes. It was simpler in concept. According to Haggerty, the whole thing came down to three main components: an air meter to measure airflow, a fuel meter to control fuel delivery, and an intake manifold. 3 parts. That is what the brochure told you. Reality had a much longer parts list. The system came out of GM's Rochester carburetor division, but Rochester did not really design it from scratch. The real work came from a small team of GM engineers. John Dolza led the development, alongside E.A. Kehoe and Donald Stoltman, with Corvette chief engineer Zora Arkus-Duntov pushing the whole project forward. And I want to be clear on that name because I have seen it split up in comments as if it is 3 different people. Zora Arkus-Duntov is one man. Belgian-born, Russian heritage, and probably the single most important engineer in Corvette history. What this team did was take proven aircraft fuel injection principles and adapt them for an automobile. Bendix had been building mechanical fuel injection for piston aircraft engines for years, and that technology was reliable. The thinking was pretty straightforward. If it works at 20,000 feet, it ought to work on the highway. Honestly, copying a proven aircraft system was the smart move. The problem was never the concept itself. It was everything that came after the concept hit the real world. So, what did the Rochester Ramjet actually do when they bolted it onto the 283 cubic inch small block V8? The top fuel-injected version, RPO 579B, was rated at 283 horsepower at 6,200 RPM on a 10.5:1 compression ratio with a solid lifter camshaft, 1 horsepower per cubic inch. That was the headline Chevrolet put on every ad and every press release they could print. Before this, only Chrysler's Hemi engines had reached that milestone. But here is the part the hardcore crowd has debated for years. The 283 number was actually conservative. The engine was really putting out closer to 290 horsepower. Some historians believe Chevrolet deliberately underrated the fuelie, so the marketing headline would land perfectly clean. A round number, 1 for 1, marketing over accuracy, would not be the last time. Now, for context, the dual-quad carbureted 283, the next engine down, made 270 horsepower and cost just $182.95 as an option. The Ramjet fuel injection cost $484.20, nearly 3 times the price for 13 extra advertised horses. But the real advantage was never just peak power. The Ramjet spread its torque over a much wider RPM range, let the engine rev cleanly to 7,000 RPM, and it solved the fuel starvation problem that killed carbureted engines under hard cornering, when gasoline sloshed to one side of the float bowl in a fast turn. Port injection did not care, and the results backed it up. The fuel-injected 1957 Corvette was arguably the quickest production car in the world at that point. But it was not just the Corvette. Chevrolet also dropped the Ramjet into stripped-down 152-door post sedans, the lightest and cheapest body in the lineup, mated to the most powerful engine available. Those cars picked up the nickname Black Widow. And those Black Widows were so fast on the NASCAR oval that NASCAR stepped in and banned both the fuel-injected Chevys and Ford's supercharged 312 Y-block engines before the '57 season even ended. Getting banned because you are too fast is not exactly a failure. One thing I do want to clear up though. I have seen people claim this system automatically compensated for altitude changes the way a modern ECU does. No, there is no barometric pressure capsule anywhere on the Rochester Ramjet. It measures airflow through a diaphragm, not atmospheric pressure. Important distinction if you are ever trying to tune one of these at elevation. But here is where the real trouble started, and it started almost immediately. The Ramjet looked simple on paper, 3 components, right? But Haggerty spoke to restoration specialists who documented over 20 different part numbers and at least 16 significantly different system variations just across the production run. Rochester kept redesigning things on the fly. Early 1957 units had a fin-top plenum and a dual-tube fuel distribution spider. By February of '57, they had already switched to a single right-tube spider. Then they relocated the control diaphragm vent from the underside of the fuel meter cover to the outboard surface of the fuel bowl. Then new ID tags. Then different nozzle configurations. If you were a dealer mechanic in 1958, the unit you serviced last month might look nothing like the one sitting in front of you today. The documented issues were real. On early systems, 1957 through '61, the cold start enrichment toggled on or off like a light switch instead of gradually stepping up fuel delivery. So a cold morning either flooded the engine with raw fuel or gave you almost nothing. The cranking signal valve was another known headache. And the worst one was the hot start problem, what they call percolation. After you shut the engine off, heat soaked up from the manifold into the fuel distribution spider and literally boiled the fuel sitting inside the lines. GM's first attempt at a fix was a thick cardboard gasket sandwiched between the plenum and the adapter manifold to block heat. It did not work well enough. They pulled it after early '58 and kept trying other solutions, but percolation haunted the system for years. Now, here is what does not get said often enough. I have come across a lot of people who actually grew up around these cars, whose families owned and maintained them, and they will tell you the Rochester Ramjet was not a bad system. It was a demanding one. You could not just hop in, start it cold, and putt around the block. You had to warm it up for several minutes, drive gently for a couple of miles, and then open it up and let it breathe. It needed exercise. The owners who understood that routine had cars that ran for decades. The ones who did not, or whose mechanics did not, ended up with a very expensive aluminum paperweight on a shelf, replaced by a pair of 4-barrel carbs. So was it a bad system, or just one that showed up before the mechanics were ready for it? If you ask me, I think it was the second one. The Ramjet was available across Chevrolet's full lineup in 1957. You could get it on a Corvette, a Bel Air, even one of those stripped-down 150 sedans. Pontiac offered the exact same Rochester system on the Bonneville in mid-'57 and again in '58. But after 1959, Chevrolet pulled fuel injection from every passenger car line. Gone from the Bel Air, gone from the 210, gone from the 150. The only place it survived was the Corvette, and even there it only lasted until 1965. The price killed it more than anything else. That $484.20 option was roughly 1 month's average salary for an American worker in 1957, according to Corvette magazine. CorvSport calculated it at about 15% of the entire purchase price of a new Corvette, which started at $3176. you were paying nearly 3 times the cost of the dual-quad 270 horsepower carbureted engine for 13 extra horses and a system your local mechanic could not fix. And then the big block arrived. By 1965, Chevrolet could hand you 425 horsepower from a 396 cubic inch engine for far less money and far less hassle than a complex mechanical injection system sitting on top of a small block. Cubic inches were cheap. Precision engineering was not. And in '65, Chevrolet quietly pulled the plug on the Ramjet for good. And here is the thing. You would think GM learned their lesson after the Ramjet, but it took them almost 20 years to try fuel injection again on a production car. And when they finally did in 1982 with the Crossfire injection system on the Camaro, Firebird, and Corvette, the same story played out all over again. Uneven fuel distribution, underpowered results, and owners ripping the system out to go back to carburetors. I did a full breakdown on the Crossfire in a previous video, and I will leave a link for you if you want to see just how badly that one went. Now, here is the twist nobody saw coming. While the Rochester Ramjet, the mechanical system that actually worked, faded away, its biggest failure of a rival was quietly changing the world. Back in early 1958, Chrysler had tried electronic fuel injection with the Bendix electrojector. It was a disaster. The transistors could not handle engine heat, the system would not start reliably in cold weather, and Chrysler recalled practically every electrojector car after a few months. Total embarrassment. But the patents survived. Bendix sold them to Bosch in Germany, and Bosch spent nearly a decade refining those same patents into the D-Jetronic system, which debuted in 1967 on a Volkswagen 1600. That D-Jetronic is the direct ancestor of the electronic fuel injection running in every single car on the road today. The system that could not reliably start a car in the cold ended up fathering every engine control unit on Earth. If that is not ironic, I do not know what is. As for the Ramjet cars themselves, today, a genuine fuel-injected 1957 Corvette is a 6-figure collectible, routinely crossing $100,000 at auction. But exactly how many were built? That depends entirely on who you ask. Some sources count 240 Fuelie Corvettes out of 6,339. Total 57 Corvettes produced. Corvette magazine puts it at 713. RM Sotheby's reports 1,040 Fuelies sold for the '57 model year. The gap probably comes down to whether each source is counting only the 283 horsepower version, all injected engines including the 250 horsepower variant, or every unit including early pilot cars. I will be honest with you, I could not find a single number that everyone agrees on. If you know which count is actually correct, settle it for us in the comments down below. But that wraps up the story of the Rochester Ramjet. A system genuinely ahead of its time, too demanding for the mechanics of its era, ripped out of cars by frustrated owners, and now one of the most desirable factory options in the entire collector car world. Let me know in the comments if you have ever seen a real Fuelie in person, or if any of you have actually worked on one of these Rochester units. I am curious, if you were buying a new 1957 Corvette, would you have spent the $484 on fuel injection, or pocketed the cash and gone with the dual quad carbs? I think I would have a hard time passing up the Fuelie, but that is just me. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps me out, and I will see you all in the next one, enthusiasts.